Hey everyone, because we can't meet, we're going to celebrate our scrutinies anyway. So this is for March 22nd, Sunday, March 22nd, the fourth Sunday of Lent, and our second scrutiny. So Mike, would you like to read it?
Yes, I'll read the first reading. It's from 1 Samuel chapter 16. The Lord said to Samuel, "Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem, for I have chosen my king from among his sons." As Jesse and his sons came to the sacrifice, Samuel looked at Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is here before me." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not judge from his appearance or from his lofty stature, because I have rejected him. Not as man sees does God see, because man sees the appearance, but the Lord looks into the heart." In the same way, Jesse presented 7 sons before Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen any one of these." Then Samuel asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse replied, "There is still the youngest who is tending the sheep." Samuel said to Jesse, "Send for him. We will not begin the sacrificial banquet until he arrives here." Jesse sent and had the young man brought to them. He was ruddy, a youth handsome to behold, and making a splendid appearance. The Lord said, "There, anoint him, for this is the one." Then Samuel, with the horn of oil in his hand, anointed David in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Our first reading from the book of Samuel tells us something really important, that man always judges from the outside, but God judges our hearts. And as we go into our scrutiny, the story of the man born blind, we begin to see that the one who really has the most vision in this story is the one who has no physical vision. And it gives a great setup for our scrutiny. So that's where we're going to go right now.
Oh, the gospel. Okay. We'll skip right to the gospel. It's from the Gospel of John. It's in chapter 9. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. We have to do the works of the one who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and smeared the clay on his eyes, and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed, and came back able to see.
His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is," but others said, "No, he just looks like him." He said, "I am." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He replied, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went there and washed and was able to see." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I don't know."
They brought the one who was once blind to the Pharisees. Now Jesus had made clay and opened his eyes on a Sabbath. So then the Pharisees also asked him how he was able to see. He said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and now I can see." So some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinful man do such signs?" And there was division among them. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you have to say about him, since he opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet."
Now the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and gained his sight until they summoned the parents of the one who had gained his sight. They asked him, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How does he now see?" His parents answered and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. We do not know how he sees now, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He can speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone acknowledged him as the Christ, he would be expelled from the synagogue. For this reason his parents said, "He is of age. Question him."
So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." He replied, "If he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is that I was blind, and now I see." So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you not want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" They ridiculed him and said, "You are that man's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this one is from."
The man answered and said to them, "This is what is so amazing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if one is devout and does his will, he listens to him. It is unheard of that anyone ever opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything." They answered and said to him, "You were born totally in sin, and are you trying to teach us?" Then they threw him out.
When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord," and he worshipped him. Then Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see might become blind."
Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind also, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you are saying, 'We see,' so your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Okay, guys, so here, all of you have been through a breaking of the Word. You've heard the readings from the first reading and then the Gospel. Normally we have this as an interactive type deal, but obviously we can't do that today with you guys, but we can do it between the three of us. So what I'm going to do is ask Mike and Joanne to try to keep this going like a fireside chat like we do. So what we're going to do is, this is the sixth, well, I tell you what, let's set this up where we are right now. This is the sixth of seven, what they call signs in the book of John. The last one, and basically when they say signs, they're talking about miracles. So the last one will be next week's scrutiny, which will be the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And if you go back, it begins at the wedding at Cana as the first one, and it progresses through, and each of them gets a little more dramatic to where it culminates in the raising of Lazarus, which is informing us about where we're heading at the Passion, Christ's resurrection from the dead, and then death to sin, and then we follow suit in some some mysterious way. So let's see where we are here. Basically, we're coming off of Jesus' longest teaching anywhere in the Gospels. So what's happened is they're walking. In the way to kind of look at it is, and the way I do it is that Jesus and the 12 are just strolling along, and they come across this blind man. And the first thing they ask, and they don't ask it in a way that's critical of it, they're just saying, oh, by the way, why is this man born blind? Who sinned, him or his parents? I want to read you two things. While I'm finding it here, I want to say that what I'm going to do is be a little more methodical today and use notes as opposed to doing it just kind of ad lib. But let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 5. It says, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Iniquities is, this was the notion that somehow what the fathers and the fathers in front of them had done was passed on to the children. And then let's go to Ezekiel chapter, I think it's 18. It is. So, and it says, yet you say, why should not the son suffer for the iniquity of the father? When the son has done what is lawful and right, and has been careful to observe all my statutes, he shall surely live. There seems to be a contradiction there in the Old Testament. One seems to say that the sins of the fathers do matter. Ezekiel seems to say that it doesn't. We get to Jesus, and Jesus says it doesn't. Obviously, we know that in the Scriptures there are no contradictions. So, in a mysterious way, it is not a contradiction that seems to be a contradiction. The best analogy that we have talked about in the past is there seems to be some things passed on. For instance, alcoholism or child abuse or gypsies who steal, or what. In other words, there is some kind of thing that happens that if your parents were thieves and their parents were thieves and their parents were thieves, it would appear that you would be a thief if there was alcoholism involved in your past. So there does seem to be that. But what Jesus is saying here, which is not a criticism, is that it's not really, it doesn't happen because of that. It is happening, well, it's happening because of it in the sense that the propensity is there, but it can be stopped at any point. So the key here, though, is with this one is that this is providential. Jesus is going to use this man to show a bunch of things, and what we're going to do is we're going to start there. So here we are. This is the most poignant way in which Christ takes on evil and suffering. Nowhere else in the Gospels does he take it head on the way he does here. And also the audience. This is the entire world, the audience here. So who do we have here? We have Jesus, we have the disciples, we have the man, we have the man's parents, we have the crowd, and we have the Pharisees. So all the players are present for this instant. So basically what Christ is saying, and then we'll just start here at the beginning, we're going to take on good versus evil. Some people might say, well, why is blindness evil? Well, it's just, it has been brought into the world by the sin of Adam, blindness, all the infirmities that plague man. So whether it's the sickness or whether it's actual suffering, and obviously suffering, sickness is suffering. All right, so it's coming off the light of the world. Jesus is also coming off the light of the world teaching. So what he's saying here is, he says, as long as I'm here, Christ, as long as I'm here, I have to do this sort of thing. I can't live in darkness. So where he says, as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Now he's done the teaching in chapter 8, but he says, what he's saying is that I have to go about my Father's work in a sense. So for me to heal is what I do. So his first thing he does is he spits on the ground. So Mike or Joanne, what does this represent? He spits on the ground, he makes clay of the spittle and anoints the man's eyes with the clay. He says, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sin. So what are we doing here?
It brings us back to the creation story.
Absolutely. So Jesus is basically taking the clay of the earth, and the man's already there, but he's gonna heal him from that, and he sends him to the pool of Siloam to wash. And what does this represent?
The Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit, but something else about water.
Baptism.
Baptism.
Of course, yeah.
So he goes into the water. I'll just tell you as a secondary note, the Pool of Siloam in Jerusalem is fairly recently discovered. It's my wife's favorite place in all of Jerusalem when we went there a few years back. So Jesus makes a comment throughout here. The Pharisees have heard everything that has been taught from the beginning till now, and they should know better, and they don't. So he goes and he washes. Actually, the Pool of Siloam means sent. In a theological way, Jesus is sent to us. Jesus sends the man to the Pool of Siloam. So what he's saying is, Jesus says, I'm the light of the world, and what I do, I bring light to the blind. So for us, we should, as we move through our journey with Christ, he should become more and more illuminated, and we should see him more and more. So the first thing that happens is he's cured. So is the first thing the Pharisees ask is this not the man who used to sit and beg? And then the crowd is said, well, they say, yeah, it is him. No, but then they say, well, no, he might not be him, but he kind of looks like him. So the crowd is wavering. Why would the crowd be wavering?
Because he miraculously got his sight, they would be shocked.
They would be shocked. But also, what happens to them if they acknowledge Christ as this guy?
They get thrown out of the synagogue.
They get thrown out of the synagogue. Yeah. They get excommunicated. So, and that we see that with the parents later. And the parents, in one of those kind of sarcastic ways, they deflect. They say, wait a minute, ask him. He's old enough. He can speak for himself. They don't want to get involved, in a sense. Because in the first century Judaism, in first century Palestine, to be excommunicated is to be what? Essentially barred.
Adrift, yeah.
Yeah, you're barred from everything. You'll have no ability to interact with people. You'll be in a situation where you'll be excommunicated in the true sense from the synagogue, but in essence you'll be excommunicated from the society. It would probably have some really negative effects on your life, just your general life, not just your spiritual life. The cool thing here is the kid had no fear about this, and I'm going to kind of jump ahead here because once again, in a fairly sarcastic way, or certainly in a way like that logic would dictate, he says when they start questioning, the more they press him, the more he tells who Christ is. The more fervent his faith becomes. So the Pharisees are just pressing in on him. And he finally gets to the point where he just says, I don't know. I just know I was blind, but now I see. So
that's my favorite line of the whole thing, because I think that's how we are in life. Like, why do you have your belief in God and all that? And it's like, well, I don't know what the answer is, but all I know is I was blind and now I can see.
Absolutely. So just like last week, he starts off, remember here he says, after they question him the first time, the blind man says, the man called Jesus. So he's a man. He has no concept. He can't see. This guy just comes by. He hears the disciples probably say, who sinned? And he's probably sitting there thinking, all I did was be born blind. I'm sorry. And so but he doesn't know who this is that did it. He just said this man did it. But over here in verse 17, he says he is a prophet because now he can see. But the Pharisees, to show the hypocrisy and the total position that they had, how ludicrous their position is, they said maybe he really wasn't blind. It said right here, the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called his parents. So they're making that you have to have the witness of people to say that in fact he was a blind guy. There's kind of this simplicity to the man. The man is he has this childlike faith, even though he's grown. He has this childlike faith, and he's very simple in his logic. Like Joanne just said, I was blind, but now I see. I don't have any idea who did this. I don't have any idea how this happened. I just know that I used to couldn't see, and now I can. So what's happened here is that now the Pharisees excommunicate the man. They excommunicate. Now this goes back to this, how ludicrous this whole situation is. They excommunicate him for being the recipient of being healed. It's not like he did anything. The man's probably sitting there thinking, in a sense, I'm sitting here minding my own business. This guy comes by and heals me, and you're kicking me out. This is not a very good look for the Pharisees at this point in time. What we know about Christ is Christ likes to lift burdens. He likes to heal on the Sabbath. Where else would you do that? I mean, the Sabbath, it's this place where you're supposedly the closest to God, and He's going to heal on that day. Christ likes to lift burdens, whether they're physical, emotional, or spiritual. So we rock on here. The man is he's a model of Christian witness. He has no fear about saying what has happened to him, and now what he sees. And so, it goes to he goes to not knowing who Christ is to worshiping Christ. And the Greek word that's used there is latria, and that's is Latria, and it's only used for adoration. It's only used when we're talking about God, and you see that over here. He calls him Lord, Kyrios, Lord, I believe. When Christ asked him, "Do you believe?" Basically, what it boils down to is the needs of us people, human needs and desires, trump the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not to be used as an excuse not to do something, not to heal or to do anything else. Just some interesting notes here. The Pharisees call Jesus a sinner, but they're cowards, because, and this is, I know if y'all were here, I would say this is hard for you to answer this question, but they're calling him a sinner, and what's kind of unique about that?
Well, they're the sinners.
Well, they're the sinners. That's true. But here, they won't say it to his face. They tell the man that Jesus is a sinner. They're not doing it to Jesus' face. Give God the praise when they press him to give them an oath. He says, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." But Jesus isn't there to defend himself, so they're cowards. They're going in different directions. The Pharisees are going down, the man is going up. And so, in our walk with Christ, this man being kind of the poster child for our walk with Christ, it kind of goes like this: acknowledge what we don't know and proclaim what we do know. So if the man says, "I don't know how this happened, but I'll proclaim to you that it did happen." So in our walk, if there's something we don't understand, I think the message here is acknowledge that. We don't understand this. This is a mystery. Or we need to study it more, theologically speaking, or spiritually, or however. We need to study it more. But let's acknowledge that we don't know it, but don't accept that as the final thing. Acknowledge we don't know it, and then go and seek to know it. So it goes to that ask, seek, and knock. But once we figure it out, then we should proclaim it to the world. And verse 25 kind of goes to that. It says, the man answers them when they say, "We know he's a sinner." He says, "Well, whether he's a sinner or not, I do not know." And then he goes into his kind of cute little sarcastic answer to him.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, going back to the first reading. You have the Pharisees, who are the educated and the elite and the wealthy, and then you had this beggar who was blind. But really, which one had the spiritual sight to recognize Christ when he saw him. So it just goes back to God looking at the heart, and we can't always look at the outside because God works in different ways than we anticipate he's going to work.
And I think, and this goes to Christianity in general, and Judaism for that matter, but there's a simplicity here, and Joanne is a Franciscan, and there's a simplicity to the Franciscan way of viewing spirituality and viewing theology. That doesn't mean that you should not try to be a St. Thomas Aquinas also, though.
Bonaventure.
Or St. Bonaventure, who was also, St. Bonaventure was a great scholar and a Franciscan. So, but the thing is, it's not one or the other, it's both and. So we should seek to know as much as we can, and then we should approach it in a childlike way, but once we, and going back to what I was saying earlier, once we figure it out, y'all know I've said I'm a parrot. That's all I do is just parrot things I hear. But once you figure it out, then don't be afraid to go out there and tell people about it. And if you do it through your deeds, or whether you do it through the life you lead. We talk about this in other places, but sometimes the deed, you have to do the deed. I won't go into St. Francis's story, but sometimes you actually have to do something. And sometimes you can just be around people and they can see your life as exemplifying a Christ-like, a life of gospel values. So with that in mind, it's not an either or, it's a both and. So let's go on. It's kind of interesting. There's always some Old Testament reverberations in these things. So Jesus says to the man, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." What happened in the Old Testament, Mike or Joanne, where somebody said, "Go wash"?
I think Elijah told Naaman, the leper,
Yep.
to wash in the Jordan 7 times.
He did.
And that was just a recent reading, I think, and he didn't take it very kindly at first, but he said, "Okay, well."
Yeah, I've been healed.
Yeah.
This heals me. So there's nothing in the life of Christ that's not somehow mimicking something in the Old Testament. And that's another thing that the Pharisees just weren't seeing. Had they stopped for just a second. Now we talk about this all the time. They have skin in the game. And for those of you, you've heard me say before, maybe we shouldn't be totally hard on them. Maybe we should be try to understand at least where they were. This is a difficult proposition for them, but they were blind. They should have known better. They hear all this. The blind man shouldn't have gotten it, and the Pharisees should have gotten it. So, and that's kind of where you guys are, the catechumens. In the old church, in the ancient church, for people who had never heard the word, and some of you have, most of you have probably heard it, but for these people, their progress should follow this progress. A catechumen should go from total ignorance, in a sense, to total worship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that tipping point of faith, at the end of the reading, he says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" This is the first time that faith actually came into the picture. Because normally Jesus would say, "Your faith has saved you," but this man, he was totally clueless. He didn't know who Jesus was, and so finally, through all this, he says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And this question that he says, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" This is his tipping point of faith. This is where he goes from a bystander to someone who is actively believing and, well, worshiping Jesus. And that's kind of something that we're called to every day, that we go from just being an observer to being a worshiper to, "I do believe, Lord." And that's how we start our creed. We say our rosaries every day. "I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth." So this man goes from...
So
Do you
while
do
he's
you,
doing, like
do you
he's,
redo it and then you just link it?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll cut them together.
Okay.
And I'll cut out this part, because I'm recording right now, so I'll cut out this part.
okay.
All right, so about 3 or 4 more minutes to kind of wrap it up. Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying?
like what do we want to say? How do we want to end this?
Well, I was gonna.
You have an ending? No, I mean, no, something that will kind of tie it and make it.
Yeah, I was just gonna basically say that some see and hear and believe, and some see and hear and don't.
Right. Okay.
Something just along those lines.
Yeah, just that and then.
So you ready to?
It's filming.
Oh well, don't. You're ready to cut this. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna wrap it up here. But we did go from man to prophet, and then in verse 35 here, he calls him the Son of Man. Do you Jesus says, and what Mike was just saying, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he acknowledges, Lord, I believe, and that's the Rcia. So what the way we'll kind of figure it out here or wrap it up here is some see and hear but do not believe, and those people bring judgment on themselves, and that's what the Pharisees have done. If the Pharisees were still blind, they would have an excuse, but Jesus tells them you have no excuse. How does he put it? He says,
because you see.
Are we also blind? If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains. So they're culpable. The Pharisees, at this point, they can no longer say we don't know, because they've heard the gospel. They've seen the progression of the blind man. That's the progression that they should have come up with, or should have followed. It basically goes from those who are learned and those who are ignorant. You can be ignorant and not be culpable. You can't be learned and not be culpable. So we'll end it with that. And thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you now.